Hi there, it's Scott Nicholson here from Syracuse University with session 2 of the Games and Libraries class. Now, today what I want to talk about is the concept of what a game is. Because I thought before we go into talking about gaming, I want to better define what is a game. Now, there's many different definitions actually. This book, The Rules of Play, which is actually a very good book learning about games, and it's been used in a textbook in a lot of game design classes. It's called Rules of Play, Game Design Fundamentals by Salen and Zimmerman. This is an excellent book for exploring a lot of aspects of games in a serious fashion. And they have a whole chapter where they talk about a bunch of different definitions of what is a game. And they end up putting together a nice little table where they compare them all. Now, part of it is the purposes of defining a game for this book are different than the purposes of defining a game for what we need. Because we're trying to think of what is a game as it's seen by a library. Because when I've looked at these definitions, I've kept that in mind, that I need to find a definition that fits for our setting. And so the definition that I have been using for the last couple years to talk about what a game is actually comes from an online journal, the Games Journal. And if you go to this URL below, this is your reading assignment for today, to go and read this article. It's written by Kevin Maroney, and his definition of a game is relatively simple, which I like. It makes it easy to talk about. He says a game is a form of play with goals and structure. So it's a game is a form of play with goals and structure. So there's three elements to what makes up a game. First, it's play. Second, it has goals. And third, it has structure. So let's talk about each one of those things. First, the concept of a game being a play activity. So play, meaning it's not a work activity. It's something you're doing for fun, something you're doing for leisure. What this does is it actually separates games from simulations. There are many folks that use simulations for training in workplaces or training in the military, when the goal of those simulations is not play. It is learning. It's preparing for a job. And so this definition of game separates games from simulations. So you'll find sometimes when I want to talk about a bigger spectrum of this type of activity, I'll say games and simulations, because a simulation that is not done for play is not seen by this definition to be a game. The second concept there is the concept of structure. And so structure is the idea of rules, of the idea of when we sit down and we're going to play a game, part of what's going on is we have this unspoken agreement between us that we're going to both adhere to a set of rules. We're going to adhere to some kind of structure for this play activity. And that's the difference between unstructured play. There have been studies about structured play and unstructured play and how each teaches you different things. So in unstructured play, that's where you don't have rules. That's where you're just enjoying fiddling around with stuff. You know, whether you're running around outside, you've got a stick and a ball, and you're just playing around with it, stomping around in the mud. There's not structure there, it's just play. And you can take the components of a game and you can play with them. You can take the bits and the dolls and the dice and boards and cards and whatever, and you can just play and explore without structure. But for a game activity, as we're talking about for this class, it has some kind of a structure to it. The third part are goals. And so in order to be a game, by this definition, there has to be a goal. There's something you are pursuing, something you are chasing after, a reason for doing what you're doing, and a way to know when what you're doing has completed. Now, one challenge about this idea of having a goal is then what happens with the concept of a role-playing game. Role-playing games, and I'll talk about these on a future episode, are games where you're telling a story together, where one person is a moderator who is leading a group of other people through a storytelling exercise. And you may say, well, what's the goal to that? Is there a goal? Now, these goals can actually be self-imposed, or they could be smaller goals. And so in role-playing games, you do have something you're pursuing. We're going to save the princess. We're going to do this. Or a self-imposed goal. I want to get my character at the next level of power. Something like World of Warcraft, for example, does not have an ending, but it does have many, many goals. If you're playing the game, you'll find that you have quests to go on, and you may have self-imposed goals. Now, this is where goals separate games from virtual worlds. And so I'll say it now, for purposes of this class, Second Life is not a game. And I don't plan on talking about Second Life. You can have games within Second Life. you can have an imposed structure, rules, and a goal within Second Life, but as it stands, Second Life is a platform. It's a virtual world. And so for this set of videos, I'm not going to go into virtual worlds in libraries because that's a very different topic and very different areas of exploration. So that's why, again, if I want to talk about games and game-like activities in a really broad fashion, I will talk about game simulations and virtual worlds. That all kind of rolls off the tongue in one set because it separates. You've got game activities here, things, and you've got the virtual worlds here, which the virtual worlds don't have goals. They're more of a place to explore. You can have self-imposed goals. You can turn Second Life into a game for yourself. I want to have a big house. I want to have lots and lots of Linden dollars. I want to give lots and lots of money to Linden. But you can have those self-imposed goals. Or you can create a game within Second Life. You can say, hey, welcome to this building. Here's the purpose. You want to get out in 1 minute and solve the puzzles and whatever. You can create that game within Second Life. It's a platform, but that's what it is. It's a world exploration platform. And so, how about things like puzzles? Now, I see puzzles can be a game by this definition. If you think about it, it has some sort of form of play with goals and structure. So something like a jigsaw puzzle out there is a game activity, if you're going to use this definition. And the reason why I'm comfortable with that is because in libraries, if you have a community jigsaw puzzle sitting out there, the interactions that go on around the jigsaw puzzle are the same types of interactions that are going to go around a board game. So for the purposes of games and libraries, that makes perfect sense. It fits because the activity of a multiplayer puzzle is akin to the activity of a multiplayer game. In fact, some people argue that a lot of board games are really puzzles. That's really what you're doing. So there's a very blurred line between the two, and I don't think that line is important. Now, some people, what they say is that, well, the difference between a game and a puzzle is that a puzzle has an ending state that is known, while a game has an ending state that is not known. It's an unknown ending state. So, but for the purposes of what I'm looking at with games and libraries, that isn't important. That is not an important distinction. And in fact, I'd rather group puzzles in with games. When I'm talking about games, also jigsaw puzzles and puzzles that can be played with multiplayer fit in with games that can be played by multiple people. Now, how about something like sports? That'd be a question. Are sports games? Well, look at the definition. A form of play with goals and structure. Well, sports certainly have structure and they certainly have goals. But are they a form of play? And this is where the purpose of what you're doing comes into play. Why are you engaged with that sport? Is it for fun? Is it for play? Is it something that you're doing because it's fun? Well then, okay, sure. Is it something you're getting paid to do, as in a professional sports environment? Well, then you might question, well, is that really a game if you're doing it as a way of making money? You could put competitive casino games, poker, and things like that into that category. Why are you doing it? Are you doing it as a form of play, or are you doing it to win money? Are you doing it as something to support your livelihood? Because you're going to make different decisions about that activity and how you approach that activity, and the way that activity affects your brain is going to be different if you're perceiving it as play or as work. So that's some definitions of what is a game. So for this class, I'm going to be talking about a game as a form of play with goals and structures. Something else that I want to talk about, some of the other definitions have some other aspects that I want to address briefly. One of the aspects is that it doesn't change the people. They say the game is an activity that doesn't change anyone, and I disagree with that aspect because games do change you. The more you play games, the more flexible your mind's going to become, the more situations you can be adaptive to because you've tried them out in a game. So, just in case sometime out there I'm dropped on the middle of an island with 3 other people and I have to gather wood and I have to gather rocks and I have to gather sheep and I have to build roads and settlements, then I've practiced that by playing the game Settlers of Catan. So I'm good, just in case that ever happens. I've been rehearsing that. Another thing that some definitions say is that the game requires some sort of a contest or some sort of competition. And that's not true. There are actually a number of games out there that have a goal, but you're achieving that goal as a group. You're in a group activity and you're going to cooperative games that you're going to win as a group or lose as a group. So I don't like to include that one. Some of them say that they involve components or pieces, and that's not true. You can have games that are just mental and are just through discussion, so there's no components or pieces. So I found that this particular definition, a game of a form of play with goals and structure, is what we're going to stick with for this class. Now, over the next few days, I'm going to be talking about a lot of types of games, but I want to briefly give you the two large camps today, and then we'll be done for today's video. The two camps of games I'm going to be talking about are analog games and digital games. So by analog games, I mean games that are in the physical space. Games that, like board games and card games, role-playing games, things like that. Those are games that have a physical manifestation, and typically when you play them, you're going to be sitting around the table looking at each other. You're going to have a face-to-face interaction. The other type of games are digital games. Now, digital games come in a number of different categories. You've got computer games, and you've got console games, and handheld games, and electronic games. And the commonality between these games is they typically have some sort of a screen that you're looking at to engage with the game. And those types of interactions are a face-to-screen interaction. And each of those activities, face-to-face interaction, face-to-screen interaction, brings about different ways that the players interact with each other. And that's going to be important as we talk about libraries using games, because we're using games with some goals, and we need to make sure that the game types we select match up with the goals. So if we're trying to bring about the interactions that happen when you're looking at other people, then we want to choose an analog game. If you're trying to have interactions that can happen when you're sharing the same screen or sharing different screens, because there's different types of face-to-screen interaction. There's face-to-screen when we're all looking at the same screen on the wall, like a big projected game. There's interactions when we're at a smaller TV, so we're physically much closer to each other. There's interactions where we're each at different screens, but the games are networked together, but we're in the same physical space. And then there's interactions that happen when we're each at our own screen in different physical spaces through something like Xbox Live, where you're connected. And each one of those brings about different types of interactions. And this is the sort of stuff that as a library choosing games you have to think about. What are the interactions that this game is going to cause? Now there's a third type, which I'll also talk about, and those are hybrid games. Hybrid games are ones that have both analog and digital components. And so there are big games and game shows and alternate reality games, and I will talk about those a bit later, but there's some that combine the two. And one of the things that I'm looking forward to in the future is the Microsoft Surface computer. And what that is, it's a computer that does a projection onto a flat surface, and you interact with it using your hands. And I see surface computing or table computing as the way that we can have a combination of the convenience of a digital game, where there's no parts to lose, the game has the rules that are imposed upon you, and you have the face-to-face interaction, which is a nice combination. I've tried this before. There's actually some sites out there where you can play board games online. And so what we've actually done is taken 4 laptops, put them in front of 4 of us, and we played the board game online while still having the face-to-face interaction. And then the computer dealt with all of the moving around the bits, and it sped up the game because the computer was doing a lot of the stuff that we would normally have to do manually. On the other hand, some people like the physical games because of the physicality of it. I do. I'm a tactile learner. I like to touch things, and so I've learned that with games, for me, part of what I enjoy is the physicalness of engaging with the game. If I play an online version of a board game, it feels very flat to me, and I don't get into it because I enjoy that physical nature of manipulating a game. So, in the next few lectures, I'm going to be now dissecting these game types further and giving you a lot of examples of different types of games. But now that we've got the basic concept of what is a game, then we finally can answer that question. Is Second Life a game? For purposes of this class and my discussion, no, it's not. So we won't be talking about it anymore. So anyway, that's enough of that for today, and tomorrow we'll be talking a lot more about analog games. Bye-bye.